How did the water get here? Where did the water go afterward? How were two of each kind enough to maintain a healthy genetic diversity afterward? And what did the anteaters eat if there were only 2 ants on the ark? And what about the poop? This story seems to be in deep shit. I'm going to do my best to assume that the Bible is true rather than just readily dismiss it. If there is a hard question that doesn't appear to have a good answer in the Bible, I'll make at least one best guess hypothesis so that you can either continue to believe that the Bible is true or begin to consider the best steelman arguments to tackle the belief in the story of Noah. But I should warn you ahead of time that there will be times that I also make the truth the Bible is conveying a little bit hard to swallow. Also, stay till the end to hear a more believable retelling of this mythical story. Let me know any thoughts you have in the comments below regarding the contents of this video. But first, a word from our sponsor, Nobody. Nobody is a wonderful brand that I would highly encourage you to give money to. They will never judge you, they will never misuse your money, and their complete absence of negative reviews makes them a brand worth trusting. Just listen to these satisfied customers. I trust Nobody. People always give me problems, but with Nobody, I was finally able to trust myself again. Thanks, Nobody. No one can be everywhere at once, but now with Nobody, a nobody like me can be everywhere at once. The load time to get everywhere is slow, but it's better than nothing. This brand does nothing. Nobody was there to take my money. What is wrong with you guys? 4.5 stars? Not anymore. 1 star by Noel. As you can see, Noel had a bit of a whoosh moment, so we can just ignore that 1-star review. But as for you, if you want to give money to Nobody directly, it is completely hassle-free. You don't have to do anything. But if you would prefer the hassle of trusting somebody to do something with your money instead, you can opt to donate to my Patreon page under Death of a Notion. Thanks again to Nobody for sponsoring this episode. Now back to Noah. This is the story of Noah that expands to highlight the big points that aren't usually brought up within the story. So, here we go. So the men of God got frisky with the daughters of man. And don't ask me how 10 generations from Adam to Noah could even have happened in the first place, since starting with only 1 man and 1 woman would lead to serious inbreeding problems by the 10th generation. But you know what? It's not impossible. So we'll just assume that Noah existed as a 10th generation heavily inbred man of God. Somehow all those men in the Bible were still living into their 900s despite all of that inbreeding. So God said, let's put an objective limit to the length of mankind's lifespan. Let's go with 120 years. And I guess he gave this limit some slack because Jan Calment of France lived to the age of 122. Genesis 6:4 states that there were some Nephilim existing at this time. Apparently none of them got on the ark later on, but somehow they show up later again in Numbers 13:33. To resolve this, we'll just say that rather than give the Nephilim some supernatural, angelic giant qualities, we'll just call them giants that emerge from the population distribution. So anyone over 2 meters tall is a modern-day Nephilim. The Lord was grieved at the evil the people were thinking about constantly and doing occasionally. So the Lord be like, yo, you're guilty of both actual crime and thought crime. And for that, I will kill you, your babies, your pets, and the animals too. But Noah was not guilty of thought crimes in the Lord's eyes, so God was planning on saving him and his family. The earth was full of violent tendencies, and all of the people were perverts. And I don't think Noah was excluded from the all of this global perversion, since he got naked and tipsy first chance he could get after the flood was over. So God gave Noah a set of blueprints to make a big boat. And then God decided to clarify that the method of global execution would in fact be by floodwaters, and not from some global sudden cardiac arrest or from an asteroid impact. It would have been nice if he did this before giving the blueprints for a big boat, but that doesn't matter too much anymore. Everything on Earth is going to die, except for the sea creatures apparently, which make up a significant portion of life on Earth. Now that I mention it, how could saltwater sea creatures even survive the severe global dilution of rainwater? Well, that's easy. They didn't. God had to make a supernatural special saltwater patch that held these sea creatures. And as for the freshwater sea creatures, they actually didn't die until the very end, where only a few of the creatures successfully found their way back to their respective freshwater habitats. And the rainwaters were supposed to be so intense, about 9 meters per hour for 40 straight days, that it probably would have drowned any air-breathing sea creatures attempting to come up for a breath. You would think that rainwaters at that rate would cause enough force to also sink the Ark as well, so to save the Ark and some of the air-breathing sea creatures, we'll just assume that God also made the rain that was directly above the Ark less severe than the rain around the rest of the world. Then God decided to exacerbate the world's inbreeding problem by commanding Noah to take only 2 of every kind of animal, male and female, and bring them into the Ark with you. Now, I'm not sure what God meant by kind, because if we're talking species, that would easily leave us with at least 1 million individual animals to bring with Noah, probably closer to 10 million. And even if God blessed a little bit of evolution to diversify from a single genus classification when he said kind, that would still safely be over 200,000 individual animals to bring with him on the Ark. Also, God said to Noah, don't forget to store a year's supply of food for every living thing with you. There is absolutely zero margin for error. If one of the dinosaurs or unicorns or woolly mammoths were to become sickly and died without reproducing along the way, they will be gone forever. So in other words, going back to the 2 of every kind, in order to even begin considering packing in 200,000 animals into the Ark at an average rate of only 0.25 cubic meters per animal, on average, you need to also allow evolution by natural selection to happen from the genus level into speciation. Even when we use the garbage numbers provided by AnswersInGenesis.com, of only needing 6,744 individual animals to allow life to be like we observe it today, those animals would on average only have 6.4 cubic meters to themselves, about the size of a walk-in closet. And as visualized here, a lot of that space would be designated to height because 616 specified that there are only 3 decks on the ship, or the big boat, or the Ark. So each animal pen would on average just be a normal closet that is unnecessarily tall for most of the animals except for the giraffe and the elephant. That average space would be even less when we consider all of the wood that would be used to make individual carrying pins for each animal, separating the predator kinds from the prey kinds. Again, there's absolutely zero margin for error. If one anteater ate a single ant, if one fox ate a single rabbit, if one lion or cheetah ate a single deer, antelope, or horse kind, they'll be gone forever. And we still haven't considered where the year's supply of food is going to be placed or how the food will be distributed to the animals. So since God told Noah to pack enough food for the entire trip, let's say that Noah and his family ate a diet of exclusively potatoes, which is a nutrition, diverse, and calorically dense food. And we'll give them a starving level of 6 potatoes a day per person. And more than 200% of this energy would go straight into caring for the rest of the animals at the rate of about 1 animal per minute per person, by the way. The amount of space on the Ark that would be designated just for the human food would amount to approximately 10 cubic meters of pure potatoes. But the environment on the Ark would surely be hot and humid. It would not be a good environment to store any food, especially potatoes, for a significant period of time. Some animals may eat off a diet of fish for the entire trip, but that heavy rain would again make that rather difficult for the first 40 days. So here's what almost had to happen in order to make Noah's flood story work. First off, bring enough food for every animal to last 40 days. After that, God had to bring manna from heaven and fish from the depths to feed the animals, who also ate less while being in a supernatural hibernation state. A lot of them probably slept in an upright position, but we'll just let that slide for now. They could have possibly stacked them, all the smaller animals, higher, and possibly had enough room for the bigger animals to actually lay horizontally. There. And hopefully the rate of 1 animal per minute per person is enough to shovel all of the methane-heavy poop overboard to prevent anything from asphyxiating due to a high methane concentration. To recap, we now require fresh manna from heaven and hefty catches of fish from the ocean after the first 40 days, in a deeply accelerated version of evolution in order to work. Because the less animals you have to start with, the more super fast evolution you need to give the diverse number of species we observe today. So let's continue. Then God said to Noah, "Hey, you know that 2 of every kind of animal command that I gave you? Scratch that. Only bring 2 of every unclean kind, but bring 7 of every clean kind." This happens in the story because Genesis is a combination of 2 different sources, named the Jehovist and the Elohist. God said, "It's gonna rain for 40 days with a 100% chance of death. Just do what I say, Noah." And then 6 verses are used to clarify that Noah did in fact do what God said, and also stating that this geezer was 600 years old. So apparently the flood waters came from beneath the ocean and from the heavens. So now we've got to figure out a way to inject more than 3 times the amount of water that exists in every form on Earth currently into Earth's system in Noah's time. So to use the Bible to prove the Bible, we'll look back to Genesis 1:7 to explain where all of this water came from, in which it states, "So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. God called the expanse sky." So according to the Bible, in the beginning there was water above the sky. I assume in orbit around the upper atmosphere. It would have saved those early humans from excess electromagnetic radiation from the sun, which could have helped them live longer. But it also would have been darker at the same time for the same reason the ocean depths are dark. I guess it's time to pull out the old flex tape and say that God did it. There is no reasonable way that God would put 3 times the amount of water that Earth has right now in the higher upper atmosphere to set up the conditions for a flood if it would have also been pitch dark on the surface beforehand. And we can't even begin to speculate what happened to this astronomical number of unaccounted for water molecules after the flood. So let's just skip that for now and go on ahead. Genesis 7:12 through 16 is redundant and unnecessary, but feels necessary to add that the Lord shut the entrance to the ark. So you're telling me that God forgot to add this very simple door closing details to the blueprints of the boat? This is where the Bible chooses to say God did it? Nah, man. Noah could have done this easily with just a couple of ropes. Don't overcomplicate it. Then the rains came down and the floods came up along with the ark. Then we're told that even the tallest mountain was covered by an additional 6 meters of water, as if the difference between 8,850 meters of water and 8,856 meters of waters makes a huge difference. Then all living things on the Earth's surface died except for Noah and those with him. The water did nothing for 150 days. This level of water pressure on the surface would have made a huge and noticeable indent in the geological record, as even small local river floods make their yearly marks on the record. Then a bunch of padding details are given about the state of the water at certain times, and that birds were sent out from the ark, and that the ark landed on Mount Ararat, of all places. Then God told Noah to come out of the ark with every living thing inside. Not sure if that was really necessary, because any thinking man capable of building a big boat would surely be able to figure out it was time to get out of those tight quarters at the first possible chance. So Noah got out of the ark and built an altar, and sacrificed some of the extra animals that he could afford to kill off. Then Genesis 8:21 through 22 seems to point out that God will never curse the ground again because of man, and that every inclination of man's heart is evil from childhood. Which is the verse that breaks me, because that is utter bullshit. Ain't nobody got time to be thinking about evil all the time. If this is true, then when somebody wants to pet a dog, it is evil. If somebody wants to get a drink of water, it is evil. If someone wants to prevent the death of other creatures by becoming vegetarian or vegan, it is evil. If I don't want people to be developing mental disorders from the mind duct that is thinking that everything they ever think is evil, that is evil. And if that is evil, I will gladly call myself the evil one, so long as I know that what I'm actually doing is either good or neutral. No more being guilty of thought crime. I am done with this BS story. But hey, maybe there's a way to make the contents of Noah's flood correlate with some hypothetically plausible historical event. Maybe maybe we don't have to throw Noah out with the floodwater, so to speak. So here's probably how the flood event really happened, assuming the Bible is at least partially true and telling some version of a historical event, given what we know about science today. This story is a work of fiction, just like the originals, but something like this probably happened in reality at some point in history. There once was a rich guy living in the Aras River Valley near modern-day Erzurum, Turkey. He had lots of cattle and livestock, a king among men. His name was lost to the ages. It may have been Noah, it may have been Gilgamesh, it may have been Atrahasis, Zeustra, or Deucalion, or none of the above. The name doesn't matter. The point is that this nameless protagonist is a legend, but we'll call him Richie. So Richie is smart, right? He notices that the nearby Aras River, just down the hill about a kilometer away, sometimes floods. And one year in the days of his youth, the natural floodwaters come really close to his estate. Another meter of elevation and his house would have been destroyed like the poor fellows who live closer to the river. And he thought to himself, do you know what? I'm a rich guy. I don't want to be swept away so easily like these poor guys next time the floodwaters come near. I need to figure out a way to protect myself with some flood insurance. So being a religious guy, Richie prayed to his god, or gods, whose precise names were also lost to time, to help give him insight into making the proper preparations for the big flood of unspecified timing. We'll call this god Zilch, just for the heck of it. In his meditative state, Richie was endowed to perform as he believed Zilch commanded him, to act out the most obvious solution, to turn his house into a boat. This boathouse was going to be a new second house. It took Richie and his servants a little over a year to make the houseboat, and Zilch was pleased at Richie's foresight. Decades pass, with no significant floodwaters to speak of. New neighbors move in close to the river. They made fun of Richie for his houseboat, which was so far away from the Aras River. As Richie was getting older, he started becoming bitter at the bullying neighbors for making fun of his Zilch-approved boat. In the year 6970 BC, all of the perfect conditions for this big flood of unspecified timing began to emerge. In this record-breaking heat of summer, the glaciers around the world receded 20 kilometers, which caused a lot of water to be released back into the water cycle, including a significant rise of the melted glacier water in the Dead Sea. A lot of this water was first used in a few consecutive massive snowstorms in the winter of 6969 BC, which caused all of the mountains in the area to be covered in over a meter of snow. Then the unthinkable happened. A constant onslaught of thunderstorm after thunderstorm, heavy rain, and a sudden increase in temperature from 0 degrees Celsius to 15. For 40 out of 50 days in the early spring of 6969 BC, there was at least 20 centimeters of rain added to the entirety of the region. So the winter snow on the mountains melted, the springtime storms raged, and the flood waters rose. By the 10th day of spring, the waters were already at the level Richie saw in his youth, with no sign of stopping. So Richie called for his servants and his family together and said, Zilch hath blessed me with the foresight to prepare for such a disastrous time as this. Quick! Gather my remaining possessions from the house of my childhood, and the livestock out in the pasture, and load them into the boathouse. Make haste! So everyone worked together to make Richie's wish a reality. And not an hour later, Richie's neighbors were found walking to him from downstream in deep distress. They said to Richie, Oh, Richie, we were wrong to have belittled you all these years. All of our possessions and livelihood were destroyed yesterday, and we were swept downstream, and we barely escaped with our lives. We have nowhere else to go, and no value to our names anymore. If you will have us, we humbly offer ourselves to be your servants henceforth. Just allow us the courtesy to live and be safe from these relentless storms. Richie was not petty to leave his mockers to drown. He accepted this as more than adequate retribution for his heartaches endured during his adult life. So Richie lifted up praises to Zilch, saying, Praise Zilch for providing me with this peaceful acquisition over my enemies. May the world hear thy name, and praise thee and accept those who come in your name forevermore. May the peace provided by Zilch and his lover Nada cover the face over this oblate spheroid we call Earth. For 10 more days, the waters continued to rise, as the giant houseboat was adequately stocked with all of Richie's possessions. Then the giant houseboat finally had adequate water around it to float on the floodwaters. By the 40th day of the spring of 6969 BC, It appeared to Richie as he was instead floating his house in the middle of the Black Sea, rather than in the Aras River Valley. There was nothing seen over the horizon in any direction. It was a surreal sight to see from his house nonetheless. And no accessible land was seen for 10 more days as the roaring floodwater slowly brought his anchored houseboat downstream. But on the 50th day of spring, Richie had floated so far downstream that he came to see Mount Ararat over the horizon. And Richie said to himself, "What a majestic mountain! If I had known such a sight existed, I would have moved myself here while I was a youth. Praise Zilch for allowing me to see these amazing things in my lifetime. I pray you allow thy servant the ability to steer this chaotically floating boat onto this beautiful mountain, where I may live the remaining years of my life free from the threat of floods." So once the mountain drew close 3 days later, Zilch allowed one of the anchors of the houseboat to be caught on a deeply rooted tree that also nestled the boat in its thick branches. It took another week for the floodwaters to recede enough for Richie's houseboat to hold its own weight again. And on that day of stepping off the boat on dry land, and after 50 days of being bound to his houseboat, Zilch sent a legendary triple rainbow to appear over the still relatively flooded Aras River. And Zilch called down from nowhere and said, "These are my 3 promises to you. First off, what you have just witnessed was the deepest flood that will ever happen over the face of the earth. I shall never flood the earth like that again. I cannot say that the total discharge rate of water over all connected basins will never be exceeded, but the amount of volume multiplied to a single river will never get this bad again. Secondly, I will also prevent this beautiful volcano that you landed on from erupting for at least 500 generations of Homo sapien reproduction. You can rest on this once volcanically active mountain in peace. And thirdly, I promise you, it is okay to be gay. I promise I don't give a fuck about how you fuck. Let this rainbow be a symbol to all who deviate from the male and female reproductive drive to sex to bring pleasure to themselves and others with mutual consent." Many people and animals died in this flood, but not enough to bring any animals to genetic extinction by making only 2 left of only male and female. And also, we don't have to worry about the kangaroos getting to Australia and the penguins getting to Antarctica and the raccoons getting to the Americas. Just thought I'd throw that in there. And we also don't have to worry about where more than 3 times the amount of Earth's current water went to, which the Bible's account cannot be reconciled with reality, unfortunately. I guess if God can turn water into wine, he can turn water into not water. In my opinion, there's just a little too much faith required to come to that particular conclusion. This video was again brought to you by me, Mr. Tim Snavely, and nobody. If you would like to become more enlightened, depressed, enraged, or thoughtful with us, depending on your previous notions you held prior to watching these videos, please do me a giddy and click on those like and subscribe buttons. Also, share, comment, and do all those other juicy social media stuff to help me get to 100 subscribers. I know, big goals, but one step at a time, y'all. And by that time, we could say that we have an entire school of sea creatures to swim in the death of a notion. Well, that is all for this episode, and until next time, kumbaya, mother duckers. Some guy said, "Hey, I need flood insurance." And guy was like, "Well, build a boat." And man was like, "Okay. How I do that?" "Well, do it like this." "Oh, okay. Well, where's the flood?" "Oh, you gotta wait for it. It'll be a few years. People will make fun of you, but, you know, flood insurance." That's a costly side effect. You know, it'll be worth it. Trust me. Oh, here it comes. Yep, it sure does. Now I'm safe. Yep. And they're not. Yep. Man, it's a big one, isn't it? Yep. Can only see water for like at least 5 kilometers. Yep. Well, thanks for the help. Yep. Anything else? Nope. Praise me. Now, what am I supposed to do with this big old boat on a mountain? Make a fire and sacrifice.